What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly. And in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Fran Maier. Fran is a serial entrepreneur and super founder with over 25 years of experience pioneering, category disrupting B2C and B2B internet businesses. Fran is widely recognized for her leadership as co-founder and first general manager of the online dating service Match.com, founder of the privacy compliance tech company Trustee, now known as TrustArc, and founder and CEO of her current venture, BabyQuip, the #1 global baby gear rental brand, almost like an Airbnb for baby gear, if you will. BabyQuip currently serves over 2,000 markets and maintains a network of independent gig economy entrepreneurs in the thousands. As an award-winning business icon, trailblazer for women in tech, and advocate for female entrepreneurship, Fran has been named to the 150 most influential women in Bay Area business by the SF Business Times, Top 25 Women in Tech to Watch in Silicon Valley by AlwaysOn, and she is a 2016 recipient of the prestigious Porras Latino Leadership Award from Stanford Graduate School of Business, where she earned her Bachelors and MBA. Fran was a featured expert on entrepreneurship in the acclaimed documentary film She Started It, and appeared on ABC's Shark Tank. Fran, I am so excited. Thank you for joining the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here too, Carly. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So Fran, what I love to do is I want to actually go back to 5-year-old, 10-year-old Fran. Who was she? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that's where I'm here now after spending over 40 years in the Bay Area when I went to college and so on. You know, I was very curious and ferocious reader when I was a child. My dad was in sales and finance, and he was a big influence.
Yeah, and Fran, I was wondering, obviously, given your incredible career that I just very much gave a glimpse to, did you have that entrepreneurial spirit at that young age, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I remember being very good at selling Girl Scout cookies. You know, I mean,
yeah.
I do think because my dad felt that he was very much his own business person, that I saw that as being a very viable path. And, you know, when I went to college, though, I started out as an English major. He was mortified. But by the time I graduated with a degree in public policy, but it had economics, statistics, and organizational theory. And then I went on to business school. So at that point, my dad was okay with me. When I was at Stanford, though, I started a frozen yogurt business on campus.
I want to know about that. That is something that I read about. In your senior year, you started a yogurt shop. Tell me, what was the inspiration behind that?
Well, again, I just wanted to make a little bit more money than I could do in regular work study. And frozen yogurt was a big hit. I know it sounds like it's been around forever, but believe me, back in 1983, it was kind of the new thing. And I was able to put together a management team and hire all the employees. And I got very good at cutting strawberries, you know, very much a hands-on entrepreneur. But, you know, it was really interesting. It taught me some good lessons about hiring and management, making sure you're taking people's money and their orders quickly and throughput, basically, and customer service. So all that stuff was good.
And then you mentioned it, but you ultimately, you got your MBA from Stanford as well. But beforehand, you went into consulting. And tell me a little bit, what were you optimizing for at that point? Was it more of that security and having a job at this time? Or was it, you know what, let's learn, or this is where I see my future and this is a good step?
It was both. I mean, consulting jobs were a good stepping stone to other kinds of industries, certainly a good stepping stone to business school. And I did learn a lot. I learned how to analyze. I learned how to write better. I remember teaching, and you're going to laugh at this, teaching all the other consultants how to use Lotus 123 on their new sewing machine size compact computers, that had a screen as big as a floppy disk, basically. I mean, but what I did learn is we did some work with the client was the Clorox company. And that was my introduction to what brand management was about. And I really thought that holistic marketing and brand approach was a lot smarter than what you saw in tech, where somebody does packaging, somebody does marketing, somebody does a product. And I really liked a more inclusive approach.
Yeah. So you ultimately go work at Clorox as an assistant brand manager. And even going into that, were there skills that came very naturally to you that lend itself to brand management?
Yeah, I just think I really, and still do, kind of have a good sense of what people want and what they're looking for. And, I was on the Kingsford brand, the charcoal brand. And around that time, I had just had my first baby. And I was buying Pampers all the time, right? And what really was queuing into those coupons from Pampers. And I remember with Kingsford, I was saying, this is what we have to do. Just flood them with coupons during the summer, because if you do that, you're just really going to keep them in the franchise. And we did it and it worked. And so I was able to sort of take something from my personal life, buying diapers for my newborn, to my work. And we tried it out, and it worked.
So, Fran, you mentioned in another podcast that I listened to actually, and you mentioned the value in being at Clorox, and you had 2 kids at this time, from my understanding. Talk a little bit about that, because as women, as you know, we think a lot about, timing wise and balancing career and raising a family. How are you thinking through that, and why was Clorox a good place to start that journey of yours?
Carly, I'd like to say that I planned everything, but my first son was not exactly planned. However, I was married. And I was at that point 28 years old. I know that sounds young now, but I kind of thought, well, I may as well go through with it. And Clorox was a hospitable employer. I certainly was not the only one who was having a baby. And it worked out pretty well, and then once you have one, then the second one is we thought was on a bit of a timetable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at that point, it was a corporate job. And, I worked hard, but I lived close to where I worked and it was fine.
And then from there, Fran, how did you end up leaving Clorox and going to AAA?
Actually, I was moved to a division that was subsequently sold. So I actually lost my job at Clorox when I was 7 months pregnant with my second son, something I don't think would happen right now.
Right.
And I interviewed for the job at AAA, and it was through a friend when I was just about to give birth, like 8.5 months pregnant, and then did the follow-up interview probably a month after he was born. I remember my husband was downstairs holding the baby so I could breastfeed.
Oh my God.
And, that was kind of crazy, but I was happy to get back to work.
Right.
I don't think I was cut out to stay home. It was nice to be able to stay home 3 months, and I could see people wanting to stay home more. But, a lot of things were happening, and I want to get back into it.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about that, because this was almost at the cusp of you were seeing the impact of the internet and AOL and all these different really big inflections that were happening. So what excited you about that? Yeah.
To me, 1994 was when I saw it. That was the first time I saw AOL. That was the first time I saw what we called then the World Wide Web. We don't call it that anymore. We saw the WWW, but that's it.
Yeah.
It's a vestige. I was reading a book at the time called The One-to-One Future, which was how to connect to your customers via video text and fax. And,
Mm.
then you see the internet and immediately I knew everything would change. And, I was in San Francisco and everything was changing.
So, Fran, even going off on a tangent here, given that you've lived through that, the world that we're currently in, right? With you hear all the time AI and all of these different crazes. Do you feel the same energy? Do you think it's the same time, but in a different way?
Yeah, yeah. I've been through this so many times in San Francisco, and now I live in Santa Fe, but I still have a house in San Francisco, and my son Joe lives in San Francisco, and he's BabyQuip CTO. So I just learned recently, well, I'm renting my house to a bunch of guys who go to Y Combinator.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
And they're doing an AI startup, and apparently AI Gulch is down the street from my house. So I decided not to sell for a while.
Yep. Makes sense.
When you're in San Francisco, I mean, I remember I started doing Airbnb in 2012, renting rooms in my house, and I thought I was late to the game.
Wow. Yeah. And then, Fran, back in 1994, take me through this GSB, so Stanford Business School. You go to a reunion. Tell me a little bit about that meeting and how obviously meeting Gary, who's the founder of Match.com with you, how was that and what happened next?
Yeah, so Gary's a kind of eclectic and very, very smart and outgoing guy. And he started this company called Electric Classifieds. And Match.com was going to be one of the verticals. And the idea for Electric Classifieds was to take all the classified advertisements from newspapers and put this on this new platform. And personals, which were on newspapers, 900 numbers, I can explain that later, were an important segment. So he wanted somebody with a really good marketing background. And I had spent time at both AAA and Clorox. And, he invited me to learn more. And, Gary's kind of crazy. But the offices were down in South Park, not very close to where Wired was. And Wired was the big thing. And
Right.
I went there one night with pizza. I went another night with Chinese food. And it was in a basement. And honestly, that winter, it got flooded half the time. It was kind of horrible. But I wanted it. I mean, you know, looking back, a lot of my Clorox colleagues joined Yahoo and Google and other stuff that probably turned out to be a little bit better for them. But I just kind of wanted to get started. And I thought, yeah, this classified advertising, especially personals, needs to be
Yeah.
reinvented for the internet age.
And it's interesting, Fran, because I can totally understand and relate to you, especially like you said, the energy in SF. People are leading with their ideas and people are getting excited about more the future rather than these almost big withstanding companies. And so for you, when you put yourself back in that room, in that office, were you most excited about what the future could become, or was it more of just like Gary's going to lead the way and I just want to be on this rocket ship with him? Like, how confident were you?
No, I think I was thinking it big. I was thinking this was going to change
Wow.
everything. And I tell this to women all the time. I mean, I didn't have a tech degree, but a good marketing and communications background is always going
Yeah.
to be good. And I thought I would certainly learn things, and that no matter what, I was going to ride this roller coaster. I'll tell you what it wasn't about for me then, though. I didn't
Yeah.
really understand options and equity positions and ownership, and I wish I had been a little bit. I should have, but I wasn't all that keyed in. And honestly, it didn't make a difference. I remember Gary's initial offer was lower than I was getting paid, and I had to go back to him and say, look, my husband's just not going to buy into this if I'm getting paid less. And Gary said, well, what about the options? And I was like, what does that really mean?
And that even brings me to my next question, which is, at the time, obviously you're a mother, you're a wife. Did you have people around you being like, Fran, you're crazy, like don't do this? Or was it didn't even matter what they said?
It didn't really matter what they said. I was committed to what I was seeing was going to evolve. And, I mean, ultimately, the fact that I didn't really care sort of led to the demise of my marriage. I mean,
Yep. And we'll get to that because I remember that is a part of it. And but Fran, in those early days of Match.com, give me a sense of what was the environment like? Because I know dating apps only recently started to get out of that stigma of meeting people online and kind of going away from that, oh, you're desperate and that messaging behind it. So how is it for you during that time and how hard was it from a marketing lens?
Yeah, so from the very, very beginning, we knew we had to position Match in such a way that it would be not compared to the 900 number personals that people were
Mm-hmm.
using. And those were kind of sleazy because the business model was you'd call this 900 number and respond to an ad, and the longer you spoke, the more you paid. Okay.
Oh,
And so the newspapers sometimes even put on especially risque ads to generate the calls and the volume and the dollars. Okay. So they were sleazy. And also, Carly, women were not engaging on the internet to the same extent men were in the mid
right.
90s. Now that changed pretty quickly. But what we decided was we were going to target women. And if you thought about what women wanted, it came down to three brand values that we adopted: safe, anonymous, and fun. But started with safe. And anonymous was pretty well back then correlated with safety. And then, of course, fun.
Fran, how important was it to have that woman influence on it? Because you were the first woman on the team, right? Or with
Oh,
Gary, or were there other?
there were some junior women who reported into me. I take credit for a couple of things, and I think, and at least two that related to me being a woman. One was,
Yeah.
the engineer runs into my office, and what weight ranges are we using? Weight in pounds. And remember, in 1995, at this point, there were no photos. So a lot of the
Right.
initial questions had to do with how you looked, right? And I said, no, 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 no. We're not doing that. We're doing body type, athletic.
Right. Not a direct number that you're going to put.
Yeah, something like that. And to this day, I haven't never seen a dating app or web app, a dating app, talk about weight. The other one was a business model. The initial idea was to charge some 10 cents per transaction or per communication, per, connection. And I knew that women wouldn't like that.
Right.
And I had just come from AAA and I saw how powerful membership was. And so that's what I advocated. That's still the primary business model for all the dating apps.
So, Fran, when you think back and reflect on this time of your life with Match, in my mind, it was very much a category designer. It created a whole new world where today it's honestly a primary way for people to meet each other in a romantic way. And how do you think through that? And where do you see, like how do you reflect on that now?
Oh, God, so happy I was part of that. Learned so much, met so many people, did all kinds of, invented things, or were doing things that later were called by new names. So we were doing viral marketing through email and referrals and things like that. We were doing affiliate marketing, but it wasn't called that. I mean, we were just doing these things because everybody was doing these things. I also know that we were so early that we didn't even know how valuable we were. We were generating over $1 million in revenue with not that many people on. These numbers are nothing compared to today. But, we sold it for less than $8 million. And had we known, we wouldn't have done that. And I was not an advocate for the sale, but I had to kind of go along with it. And I got, a couple $100,000 out of it. But unfortunately, a lot of people sometimes think that I must be, a multi-millionaire or billionaire because of Match. And it didn't work out that way.
So, Fran, given that, like you said, you sold it for around $8 million, what would you have done differently then, thinking back?
Well, first of all, it would have been great if the board could have seen the potential of Match and not sold it at all and
Yes.
put all the resources toward it. But again, the personals were sleazy. And back then, we didn't know what social networks were or what community and brand would mean on the internet. But if we were to sell it, I wish I had put together the group that bought it. Okay. Because then I would have had a better ownership and I would have been able to drive it. Within a year, it was sold for $70 million to what became IAC. Okay. And I got nothing of that. And I did all the initial work, right? I mean, all the branding, all the partnerships, the whole bit. So I really wish I had done that differently. I think I was very tired. Okay. I think that I was a woman, still am.
Yeah.
And I think had I been a guy, somebody would have suggested it. I think I wish I had more confidence to ask for help because again, I think had I done it, somebody I had more confidence and reached out to more people. Some of them would have said, "Hey, you can do this," you know? And I knew almost immediately once we sold it that I really gave up on something. And I didn't go back to online dating. Perhaps I could have done that too. But I just moved on and that's the way it goes.
And this will probably come up again, but you mentioned as a woman as well, right? Confidence is so important. And probably the thing where is hardest to actually work on or at least get better at. What advice do you have for even other female founders who may be in that position as well, right? Whereas, they're kind of being told this is what needs to happen. The outcome may not be the best for you, but this is what's going to happen. Do you have any advice in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think things are so different now in so many ways. First of all, there is actual support for founders and for female founders. And there's networks and there's, Facebook communities. There's all kinds of stuff where you can go and do that. There's also a few of people like me who can be role models or mentors or engage in the community. Now, I could only scale so much, but the point is there's many more communities for help. I also think that women should take pride in the fact that women apparently deliver better results on average to their investors than men do. And women do know categories of products and services viscerally, intricately.
I love that. And I love that you said that because I think it's also a matter of women just like getting out of our heads and being able to lean on someone and ask for help and lean on these communities because the numbers show, like you said, like they are there and we're proving ourselves. So I think I love that. And I'm happy you brought that up. And Fran, before we go on to, what you did with woman.com and then obviously TrustArc, there's something incredible about your story with Match, also probably with BabyQuip, but it's this concept that I've learned primarily even at Floodgate through Mike Maples, which is this idea where you're living in the future. I feel like you have a very good knack for living in the future and having a good idea of saying, this may not be hot right now, but if not right now, then definitely in the next year to 5 years. So what are elements of that you almost take in and internalize as criteria to determine, you know what, this is an opportunity that I need to go after?
It's funny because was I an entrepreneur or did I become an entrepreneur? Right. And then as you become something, maybe you become more of it as you do it. From Match.com, I went to women.com and that was all about women on the internet. And that was, I believe it or not, there were not that many websites aimed at women. I mean, it's shocking to think about that now, but there really weren't. And so that was a really an opportunity I saw that had to change. It just had to change. And then I went on to bluelight.com and that was getting e-commerce going. So the whole idea was to get Blue Light Kmart shoppers. That it was Kmart for people who don't remember. And to get them on the internet. And that seemed to make a lot of sense to me. And that one kind of blew up with the .com bust, but it was kind of interesting. And then I joined TrustArc because at this point I understood that brand was really going to be very important. And a big important part of online brands is privacy and control over your information. And so that made sense to me. And I knew I could just see that there were going to be all these issues coming up. And while I was there was spyware, and there was email and spam, and then social media and apps. And, that company is still trying to address these issues that consumers really care about. And then with BabyQuip, if you want me to transition into that.
Yeah, well, Fran, even before BabyQuip, there's one thing that's pretty interesting, which is there's a different theme, right? TrustArc brings a whole new world of privacy, which when I think of privacy and security, I often correlate it to you need this deep expertise and it's a very technical thing. And there's, maybe I have too high of a bar per se with having that domain knowledge. But did you find that's a challenge in order to go and lead obviously a hugely successful company in that? Like, was there a big education and learning component to it?
I think when I joined TrustArc, I already knew that privacy, and we had to care about privacy with Match and at women.com. So as GMs and CMO for those companies, I definitely was aware of the trade-offs and so on. When I joined TrustArc and started to look at the emerging issues that were coming down the pike, they were intellectually interesting to me, and I think I stuck around in part because of that. But you're right. Most of the people that I was intersecting with as clients and as others were privacy lawyers or technologists. On the other hand, to run a company, you don't necessarily have to be that. You've got to know how to build a company. And what I was able to do at TrustArc was eventually convince my nonprofit board of mostly privacy lawyers that we could no longer be a not-for-profit industry association, that we had to have technology, that we had to have more sophisticated sales if we were going to survive. And I was able to transition that from a nonprofit to a for-profit, which doesn't happen very often, but was absolutely critical for that company. And by the way, this time I got my share.
And Fran, take me into that board meeting, right? You said it has to change to a for-profit company in order to survive. And this may be even a current question for you now. Do you have almost techniques or processes to kind of give yourself that confidence? Because I love how you're saying it, but it's hard to do. It's much easier to say than actually put it in action and give yourself that conviction and whatnot. I think a lot of people struggle with this. Is there something, whether it's a mantra, whatever you want to call it, is there something that you did during this time?
I had turned Trustee around and had grown the revenues, and I knew that we had a good product and a good opportunity, but that we weren't going to get there. And in fact, Carly, I had a jaw surgery and had to take 6 weeks off, right?
Oh, wow.
And it was during that recuperation where I really couldn't talk that much. and this was about 2007. And I really kind of came to the personal realization that things had to change. Or I had to do something different. And in fact, for the switch to TrustArc, I didn't really make it a strong ultimatum, but I made it pretty much of an ultimatum. Like, if this doesn't happen, then I have to leave. And I think that message was received. I could tell you they did not expect me to succeed. Okay. And that almost gave me even more motivation to prove them wrong.
I love that. That's what essentially fueled it even.
Yeah.
And then, so ultimately you found BabyQuip, which I'm so excited to dive into. Tell me a little bit, the founding story, what drew you to starting BabyQuip?
Okay. So I transitioned, TrustArc to a for-profit company, raised $10 million from Excel. This is in 2008. I'm sure even you remember what happened in 2008.
Right. Hard time then. Yes.
Yeah. Very difficult time. And I transitioned to executive chair. We brought in a different CEO, and I left TrustArc in 2012.
Okay.
And around that time, I got a divorce, sent my youngest off to college, and moved from Alameda to San Francisco, not knowing that I bought a house up the street from Airbnb. headquarters at the
Wow.
time. And within 6 months, I was renting rooms in my house on the top floor of my home. And I didn't even tell people about it. I didn't want them to think I was some old lady who had to bring in boarders to pay her bills.
Right.
And, but, now I was looking at the gig economy and all these gig economy apps and services like Uber and like Airbnb, and I was making real money. And I mean, I didn't have to go back to work right away. And I was advising startup founders, and I was doing some nonprofit work. I was having a good time and thinking about these changes. And it happened that I was advising at Women's Startup Lab, and a gal from Santa Fe who had started a baby gear rental business here called Babierge wanted my advice. And in that first meeting, and she had a nice pitch. I said, well, I should be your CEO. And which was
Yeah.
kind of cheeky. She didn't say yes right away, but I came down to Santa Fe. I did some more of my own research, and we formed the company in May of 2016. And sure, there could have been some other things I could have done. I was doing some consulting and so on. But I really felt that I knew this. It's a consumer space. It's a marketplace like Match. I know how to build brands. I know how to run businesses like this. And I felt pretty confident I could raise money and take it to its next level.
Incredible. And Fran, through those experiences, you've also had a taste of what it looks like, especially with BabyQuip, of this is true product market fit, right? And there's something really special here. Can you talk a little bit about those signs versus maybe the ones where the founders potentially are lying to themselves, if you will, or at least being very hopeful that, yeah, maybe there's something here, but I actually haven't found it yet. How have that been for you?
For BabyQuip, almost immediately, that first summer of 2016, I put some of my own money to try and see how hard is it to recruit the supply. And we call the supply quality providers. They're mostly moms. They maybe start with their own gear, but over time they build up their inventory. And it just seemed like whenever we put a call out to get the supply, we got it. And then as soon as we put the supply, parents were there, ready to rent. And, we didn't get around to measuring our NPS score, our net promoter score, until a few years later. But it was like 80 something, and now it's 94. I mean,
Incredible.
And we had like a great day yesterday. I mean, we're probably this month going to get close to 9,000 orders. And,
Wow.
and it's March,
Incredible.
I mean, it's just kind of crazy.
How important do you think, like you mentioned, move to Airbnb, the gig economy is really starting. How important was that piece in the early days of BabyQuip as part of its success, rather than, starting it maybe 10 years earlier? Would it have taken off?
I think our timing was right. I mean, most parents now are millennials. Millennials are famous for liking to travel, getting those Instagram moments, getting those Instagram moments. And using apps and participating in the quote sharing economy, both as suppliers and as users. So I think our timing was about right. And I think that, and timing is something you have very little control over as
Right.
I'm often asked, and maybe you would ask this, what was the biggest, challenge? It's like, oh, the pandemic. Who could have seen that happen?
Yeah. Because so from my understanding, you went on Shark Tank, which I would love to hear about, but this was right around the time of COVID starting, right?
Well, we filmed prior, but our episode and our party aired on March 6, 2020.
Wow. So right around the same time. So how was that experience, and how did that ultimately affect BabyQuip? Yeah.
Had a party at my house. Nobody got sick. But
Amazing.
the next day, I think by Monday of that week, California shut down, or maybe it was Friday. And then the rest of the country, I think, shut down on the 13th. So instead of seeing this big increase in revenues and orders and excitement, we had the visitors, they just didn't get anything.
Right.
So we were bummed out, but still being aired on Shark Tank is a very positive thing. Um, and we were still small, so we took some pay cuts, but I had raised some money, so that was good. So I had some money in the bank. We took some pay cuts. We got some government money eventually, which was a first for me. And I ended up buying a baby gear equipment cleaning company. And we
Mm,
started cleaning baby gear, like strollers and car seats, for local
right.
families. So, which showed my community of quality providers that I was, going to help them too by giving them the
Yes.
services that they could do.
And Fran, you mentioned this earlier, but you ultimately brought on your son Joe as CTO of BabyQuip, and you guys were actually pitching together on Shark Tank.
Yeah, that
I
was
want to
a lot
know,
of fun.
yeah, I'm sure, and I want to know a little bit about the decision to bring him on, and also how has it been from a you hear often the phrase separate family and business, and it could be a slippery slope. How has that experience been for you, and do you go against that saying?
I think there's a lot of brothers doing startups together, a lot of father sons doing startups together.
Definitely.
So and there should be every reason for there to be mother sons doing it together. In any case, Carrie, who was the gal who I started with, startups
Yeah.
were for everybody. We were running out of money. She was getting nervous about it, and she decided to leave. I picked up the phone and I called Joe, and Joe had graduated from college and worked at Accenture for 5 years at that point, and I knew he was looking around for something new.
Yeah.
And both my sons are um, have computer science degrees, and both of them in the early days of BabyQuip would say something to me. We can't believe you're doing so well because you're tech. Well, mom, it's really not very good. And so I picked up the phone and said, Carrie's leaving, and he responded, I'm in. I
Wow.
didn't even have to really ask. Now, I can no longer call him Joey. It's Joe.
There were things that had to change.
At work, he calls me Fran, and that spills over to regular life too. We often have
Yeah.
we often have conversations like, I'm speaking to you now as your mother, okay?
Mm.
Or I'm speaking to you now as your boss. And
Right. You have to differentiate the
yeah,
two. That no,
differentiate.
that makes sense.
And I can't micromanage him, but I don't micromanage
Right.
anybody. So. And I'll tell you,
And
the pandemic, all my team, except for Joe and I, had small children or had children at home, from babies to teenagers. And if there was a time where I learned that you just got to
mm,
trust people, because I mean, that was really difficult for all those families. And that's what I did.
whether it's Match.com, TrustStark, BabyQuip, I'd love to know what aspects of yourself do you think changed from each entrepreneurial experience?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting question. I think I'm more me now. I think I'm more satisfying what I want now for me.
Yeah.
I mean,
I love that.
I think as you get older, and that doesn't mean I'm not trying to say that in a narcissistic kind of way, but I'm
No.
more clear about what I want for me.
And no, for me that makes a lot of sense cuz also in the early days there's a lot of external factors that, you're proving yourself. It's not the most
Right,
natural environment. And then you start to really grasp who you are, I think,
right.
as you get older.
I think I trust my gut more than ever, and I would say that my instincts are based on many, many, many years of experience, and not just my experience, but the experience of my friends and other businesses that I've observed and watched. I mean, I would say being an Airbnb superhost for all these years, because I didn't give it up when I took BabyQuip. In fact, I think
Yeah.
right now I have 4 houses that I rent
Wow.
on Airbnb and Verbo. And that experience, and Joe does too, for that matter, that experience
Wow.
definitely has influenced some of our decision making, right? Because
Yeah.
we see how they do it, and we're hosts. So, and I have quality providers. I have some insights, of course, for a little bit on BabyQuip. I rented baby gear myself. I can tell you those stairs in San Francisco are way too steep to carry a crib up, but I did
Yep.
do it.
And Fran, even on the same vein, how was your measurement of success? How did that change as well? What did you value most then, and what do you value most now?
Oh gosh, then it was probably position and size of company and of
Mm,
course money. And
yeah.
it's hard to avoid in Silicon Valley that money is a measure of the success. But for me, I think it's much more about impact. Um,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that money doesn't matter, but it's really nice. You know, one of the things I get a lot of gratification from BabyQuip is in two significant ways, maybe others, but one is, you know, families having a better vacation, sleeping better. That's a good. That's good. You know, they should have that.
Yeah.
The quality providers making really good money, helping each other out, using the job, using BabyQuip as a way to help their family have better vacations, or in some cases, dropping out of full time work so that they could spend more time with their family, or just, you know, paying bills in a
Yeah.
significant way, in a gratifying way. That makes a big difference too.
Yeah.
I'd say that, you know, the motivation is much deeper when it's beyond money and ownership and size, and has to do with really having an impact on people's lives. And clearly Match, you know, I made nothing from Match, but Match has been, and that experience has been very, very important to me because of the impact.
Absolutely. Yeah. And exactly. And I think that's something that there's a really common theme, which is just that focus on the customer, the end user, and how are they feeling and how can you change their experience? I think that stands out for sure. I heard there's a book about Match.com and you were coined as a quote, brash young mother of two.
Oh, I hated that. And they spelled my name wrong in the first edition.
Exactly. When I saw this, I probably had the same sentiments as you. And I just want to we hear this a lot, right? Of like how, you know, women are represented and presented and all of that. I want you to talk through that experience and how that felt. And even today, like what can you take from that for other female founders that may be in a very similar position?
I think it's okay to be angry about that. You know, I think that was sort of bullshit.
Yeah.
And you know, I had an investor that we talked to early on with BabyQuip, and Midwest guy, and he called me abrasive, and I'm like, come on, and he,
Right.
you know, and I was with Carrie at the time, the co-founder, and
Yeah.
she was like, you were not, you know, you were advocating, you were assertive, you were maybe aggressive, but abrasive. I mean, it's
Right.
just women just get labeled in such unflattering terms all the time. And you know, it's at the point now that we've got to call them on it. You know,
Yep.
that's not cool.
How do we respond to that? And what are steps to take? And I think you touched on it, right? Is just holding those accountable and being okay and and confident to speak up and really right, you know, that wrong. Because I think that's another thing where sometimes it just really goes, people, you know, you accept it or you don't go to the author or you don't address it, and then that maybe perpetuates it even more. So I think that's a really important note as well.
Right. And I think we're still at the stage that, you know, we need so many more female investors, and we need so many more funded female led companies.
Absolutely.
But you do have to find champions, male champions, and hopefully you find the guys who are a little bit more sophisticated and knowledgeable about some of the bias. Because I'm sure, Carly, you know,
Yep.
2 to 3% of the money goes to women, and
Right.
that's just so ridiculous. I mean,
Yep.
there's just no way
Completely.
to explain that other than very deep, pervasive bias.
Yeah. Okay, Fran, I have a few more questions for you that are more on the miscellaneous side, if you will. And so one of them is, what is actually the most significant thing you've changed your mind about over the past decade?
I'm kind of skeptical about marriage, just in general. And
Okay. Yeah.
clearly, you know, when I got married, and I've only been married once, uh, forever and ever. And I just think it's really hard to do, especially if you get married when you're in your 30s. And then you have the issue of, well, when are you going to have children? And so I think it's a pretty big conundrum. And while I still want my sons to have the romantic ideal, I don't press them on that, that much. And I certainly don't press them on having children. They have to make that decision entirely on their own without any influence from me.
I think about this a lot. So how much of a role being a very driven career, like you said, you had a kid and you wanted to go back to work fairly short thereafter. How much does that come into play with your views of marriage and having kids and whatnot?
Yeah, I think it's hard to be a successful woman. And I think it's hard when you're married. I think it's hard to have ambition. Maybe things have changed. I think people talk more about having the right kind of partner. I know my sons, given that they're my sons and they saw their mom, they seem to understand when they're dating other women who have ambition and don't knock them for it,
Right.
So I think things are different, but I can tell you, being a single woman now, and, pretty easy to look up, it's kind of bad, My therapist says successful women get screwed.
I'm very happy that you bring this up. And I think it's something that a lot of successful women, like you said, experience or feel, and it may even be just the dynamic of a relationship where, it's intimidating and it's if they didn't grow up in a household where the woman is working and, quote unquote powerful, then it's actually creates some friction. So I'm not I think it's such a, honest and great conversation to have, because I think it is something that we often feel.
Yeah, the worst word in the English language is emasculation.
I like that. Okay, Fran, my last question for you, if you have an answer, that's great, which is, what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
Yeah, trying to be mellower. Just a little bit more patient, a little bit more forgiving of myself, of people around me.
Yeah.
I love that. Just chilling, being in the moment, all of that.
And stepping away and almost taking a higher viewpoint of things and stepping away and realizing the significance or lack thereof of a situation.
I really try to make sure when I'm, doing something joyful that I'm remembering it. My sister has this word that she got from somebody that, we often tend to remember negative things, but we have to hold on to those really positive, beautiful moments that she calls glimmers.
Oh, I love that.
And I kind of like it. It's like, okay, this is a glimmer. This is a glimmer moment.
Yeah.
Let me, not just take a photo, but let me kind of marinate in it for a little bit and get the glimmer.
Absolutely. So Fran, you reminded me, I'm trying out this new thing in 2024 where good things happen, I actually write it on a Post-it note and stick it in a jar.
Oh, nice.
And so at the end of the year, I can, reminisce on that. But I think it's so interesting. I didn't think of it, but those are essentially my glimmers. And you're so right in that it's very hard to, whether it's be proud of it or just, ruminate in it, whatever it may be, because whether, even just getting feedback, I played soccer for most of my life, and anyone could probably tell you that I remember, you remember the mistakes you make in a game much more than the positives. So I think it is something that is just so common, and we have to just remind ourselves, it's a very active thing rather than passive.
Yeah. And those are the things that you want to be looking back on and remembering.
I love it. Fran, it has been such a pleasure to have you on She Leads. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
It was so much fun.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.